right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this Candlelight Vigil on the, can't believe it already, the 2nd of August, 2023. How time is just a strange illusion, evolution. Uh, to be in this space with you tonight for this vigil really means a lot on so many levels. As many of you know, my name is Brad Wolf. I'm the executive director of Reimagine. Thank you to those of you who have not been in this space before. We have a very, very special vigil this evening. Can't wait to introduce our featured guests. But just to say that Reimagine is a nonprofit organization that hosts all kinds of experiences to help transform our relationship, our cultural relationship on a broad scale to loss, to mortality, to adversity, and in hopes of bringing more compassion into all those subject matters and to one another. I will talk about it in a second, but I've had a very long week personally. I lost somebody very close to me, so having a place and a space to honor our loved ones it means even more personally this evening. And so I know all of us have losses either that have happened over the last month, over the last year, over our lifetimes, and this is a wonderful space to come together in community and honor those losses, whether those losses be people or other things we might want to honor together and hold space for in this environment. And it doesn't have to be things that even you hold dear to your heart in a loving way. Sometimes these relationships that we have with that which we lose can be complicated and hard, and just want to make space for all of this together, and also for joy and for laughter as well. So it's good to be here. With that in mind, I will bring up this slide deck to get us oriented. Just for those of you who want some background on the technological underpinnings of this evening's affair, we do have closed captioning available, which is very nice. If you click the little live transcript button, you'll see closed captioning run across the screen so you can read what's being shared. Also, we do an honor ceremony later in this experience, which I just described or referenced at least. And you'll be able to use the chat for that or for any technical questions that you might have. So if you have any questions about how to use any of the things we're talking about, or any also questions for any of our speakers, feel free to use the chat. In fact, right now it would be wonderful if you wanted to just introduce yourself and what brought you here this evening, keeping in mind that we will have a chance later to really honor names of people. So if you have anything else you want to share here right now, just to get the chat going, that would be fabulous. And then if you're willing to turn your cameras on, would be wonderful. We're soon going to be holding up our candles to one another, so this is also a great time to go grab a candle. And then we will have hopefully some time for some conversation or a couple questions at the end, but otherwise you'll be muted, and at that point you can unmute yourself. So that's really the background on the technology. What are we doing here? Again, I'm Brad. I'm playing some music this evening. Derek Hosberg, my colleague, built the incredible or really sweet altar that I'm looking at right now that's going to be holding the space sacred in its center via Zoom, since we can't all be together in person. Then we're going to be, in a couple of minutes, moving into this candle lighting ceremony that I just referenced. So it's a perfect opportunity, again, to grab that candle. And then we're going to dive into a beautiful conversation with Sharon and Simran, who I'll introduce you to in a minute. And then the honor ceremony is going to be led by one of our own collaborators and wonderful human, Ashley, who I'll introduce you to as well. And then we're going to extinguish our candles as a collective, and then we'll have some time for a couple questions. So that really is the gist. We'll be here for now, 90 minutes this run, so we have another 85 minutes together, and I can't wait for all of it. This is a really wonderful opportunity to be with all of you in loss and in grief, but also in connection and in gratitude. So now is the time for the candle lighting. And let's see, you have candles out there? I'm going to see if I can scroll through. I see some candles. Neat. Fabulous. Okay, so why don't we, I'm going to grab a match and get mine going. And then in a second, we'll be able to share this blessing that we've created. So we'll read this 3 times. I'll begin, and then I'm going to invite my colleagues, Misha and Dara, to join me in reciting this. And I invite all of you out there to read along out loud or in your hearts, wherever you may be, and we can feel the collective goodness of our joint intention here. By lighting our candles, we honor our personal dead, the dead across the world, and all of us still here together.
By lighting our candles, we honor our personal dead, the dead across the world, and all of us still here together.
By lighting our candles, we honor our personal dead, the dead across the world, and all of us still here together.
All right, thanks all of you. And now why don't we, I've changed my view to the gallery mode, where it's a really wonderful opportunity to just find somebody else out there that you'd want to connect with, holding your candle up and thinking of an intention that you want to send to some stranger across the world that you maybe haven't met. Maybe it's just a name of somebody. But why don't we just take a couple deep breaths together, but orient some loving kindness towards somebody else on the screen and just drop into this space with each other. I'll focus today on Stephanie Elkins. All right, thank you, everybody. We can put our candles down. We can keep them lit. We can feel the intentions that we've all created for somebody else on the screen that collectively add up to a lot of wonderful intentions for this space and for each other. I'm excited for this conversation because our guests can really talk about spirituality and its relationship in some form and fashion to this broader conversation that we're having together. And that just dovetails for me really poignantly with something I just love to share on a personal level with all of you. This past week, my grandmother, who is 102 years old, or who was 102, she was a prisoner in Auschwitz and survived just so much in her life over the course of World War II, and how the things that she did to keep her 2 younger sisters alive and together during the war after losing her dad in the ghetto, and then her mom to the gas chambers, to go through the journey that she went through was just really remarkable. And it was a big week because she's really the matriarch of my personal family, and she's taught me so much about what it means to reimagine life after something of such magnitude, so much horror, but how do we actually move through it and find meaning and purpose in our lives. And I wanted to just briefly share just a quick video snippet, a 1-minute video snippet that I shared at her funeral that I discovered at the end of a recording that I received of her the day before the first Reimagine festival, when we first kicked off as a nonprofit. I had separately gotten wind that my grandmother had recorded this video with Steven Spielberg's Shoah Foundation that had captured testimony from Holocaust survivors, and I, my whole life, had been spending time trying to capture my grandma's story, but she didn't like to be recorded. She would just kind of speak in stories all the time about the experience, but it was never the whole journey. And to make sense of it, I was left to do my own sense making around her experience. She didn't really offer deeper wisdom around the experience. She really just shared the experience itself, really through tears. And every time I saw her, I would hear elements of her story again and again throughout my life, to the point now where it's deep in my heart. But I was always looking for kind of more answers around what can we glean from all this? What does it mean that you were able to survive all of this? And at the very end of this video that I happened to track down, that no one in my family at the time knew had been recorded, she offers a little bit of wisdom to me that I've really glommed onto as something of great meaning to myself, and I feel like that has a lot of relevance for our community at Reimagine. So let me pull this up and see if I can play this for 1 sec. So this is just the very end. This is my prized possession, about 2 hours and 50 minutes into this tape, almost the last thing that my grandma says after this interview, where she documents her whole incredible life journey.
I hope that what we went through will never, never happen again. And in order for this to become true, the people have to remember what happened to us. I want them to remember that that history should not repeat itself, that people should be liberal, that should be tolerant of other races and other religions, because we are here for a short while only.
And I personally felt that was really incredible to me, not just the message about tolerance, but really I was struck by the reason why she was able to tap into it, that after going through all that, the awareness that she had about mortality, and why there should be religious tolerance and why there should be racial tolerance, that there was an awareness of the impermanence of it all, that she witnessed in such a visceral way. And so it just got me thinking at the funeral, certainly, what is it that I want to do with my short while on this earth, and what do we want to do with ours collectively? And so I've really never felt so purposeful as I feel right now in this space with all of you, and so grateful for your presence, because building a community where we take those ideas, honestly, the idea of impermanence and the idea of connection and tolerance and love and connection, and try to infuse those into a broader conversation and a movement in this world, feels really important. And so I'm grateful to have you bear witness to that little testimony of my own, and I thank you. And that segues, I feel, so nicely into this conversation this evening, where I'm looking forward to introducing, first of all, Simran Jeet Singh, the executive director of the Religion and Society program at the Aspen Institute, and the author of the national bestseller, The Light We Give: How Sikh Wisdom Can Transform Your Life. He is an Atlantic Fellow for Racial Equity with Columbia University and the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and a Soros Equality Fellow with the Open Society Foundations. In 2020, Time magazine recognized him as one of 16 people fighting for a more equal America. He writes regularly for Harvard Business Review, Time magazine, and Religion News Service. Born and raised in San Antonio, Texas, he now lives in New York City. And it is so good to have you here, Simran. Just so inspiring to me personally, given the message that I'm holding in my heart, to have someone of your stature with us in this community, who's working on these broader themes, just moves my heart in such powerful ways. So thank you so much for being here. And you're going to be in conversation this evening with our friend Dr. Sharon Groves, Vice President for Partner Engagement at the incredible Auburn Seminary, an institution that equips leaders with the organizational skills and spiritual resilience required to create lasting positive impact in local communities, on the national stage and around the world. And Sharon leads projects at Auburn that address inclusive democracy, reproductive health, and LGBTQ plus equity. She is the former director of the Religion and Faith program at the Human Rights Campaign, where she built a scholarship and mentorship program for LGBTQ religious scholars and oversaw statewide faith organizing efforts for queer rights. She is an active lay member at All Souls Church in Washington, D.C. And I am just so excited for this conversation because the two of you are bringing so much power and wisdom into our midst. And I want to turn it over really to Sharon to lead the conversation with Simran, but I'm wondering for the two of you, I had the opportunity, and we'll have one for everyone else later, to share who or what you're honoring in this space. But, if there's anyone, I want to create space for the two of you, if there's something you want to acknowledge or honor via your candle or just in this space, I want to make some opportunity for that to kick this conversation off. So I'll turn it over to you, Simran, first, and then to Sharon, and then lead the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And Brad, your reflection was so touching. I have a similar sort of person that I'm thinking about today. My wife's grandmother, who passed away recently and carried a similar kind of soul that you described, and similar kinds of experiences actually in terms of her own life and difficulties and overcoming them and finding meaning. And so just wanted to share that for the moment. So thank you, Brad. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Brad, too, and all the people at Reimagine. This has been a powerful, powerful place for the community for such a long time. And I'm really feeling honored for this conversation. And in kind of preparing for this conversation and rereading Simran's brilliant book, I was struck by it kind of took me by surprise, but that we are nearing the anniversary of the people that were massacred in the Oak Creek, Wisconsin massacre. So the anniversary for that is August 5th, happened in 2012. And 6 people were killed and 4 people were badly injured. And then I learned later that in, I guess, 2020, there was another death that happened that was related to that initial massacre. So I'm holding the Sikh community in my heart right now. Should we go ahead and get started, Simran?
Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah, so I love this book. If you don't have it, you all need to get it. The Light We Give, How Sikh Wisdom Can Transform Your Life. And I don't know that I've said this to you in person, Simran, but even though I'm pretty certain I'm a number of years older than you are, I look up to you as a mentor, and I've met you, I think the first time we met was somewhere around 10 years ago when Auburn held its first Mountaintop, which was a movement gathering. And the question on the table was, is there a multi-faith movement for justice? Mm-hmm. And I remember in that space, I just remember it vividly. I got to be in small breakout groups with you, and that you really challenged in the most loving ways, the way in which a kind of Christian sort of, I don't want to say supremacy exactly, but sort of a Christian kind of unconsciousness was circulating even inside of spaces that we marked as multi-faith. And you invited us into a kind of wrestling with what's the language that we're using to be able to talk about a multi-faith experience. And then you have done that for me throughout all the years since. And I have looked to you always for that kind of that voice saying like, well, how are you thinking about people that are quote unquote religious minorities? How are they entering in? When are they brought into the conversation? Are they helping to create the table? You've been really a powerful voice in my ear ever since that moment. So it was so delightful to be able to dig into your book, because it wasn't just a challenge, right? It was really like a love language around what we can learn and what all of us can get from Sikh wisdom. So my first question to you was really, why this book? Why now? And who were you hoping to reach? I guess that's 3 questions.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's such a it means a lot, everything you just said. I remember meeting in Tennessee about
Yeah.
10 years ago as well, and it was it was a very formative experience for me to be invited into that community, and and I think honestly, to your reflection, it feels like one of the first times where I felt comfortable sharing some of the challenges that I felt in multi-faith spaces, and wasn't sure how it would be received. And it was, I mean, to know that people are open to hearing criticism, challenges, feedback, and being willing to engage with. I mean, that was really special for me. So I'm so glad you brought up that time together. It meant a lot to me. In terms of the book, I mean, I would say I've had the opportunity to do many cool, exciting things in my life, and I'm really grateful. And I would say that this is probably the one that's been a dream for me since childhood. And I think the real impetus for it comes from growing up in Texas with my brothers, constantly feeling like people had no idea who we were, even though they had their assumptions about who we were, and they were typically wrong, and actually quite dangerous. And I think my feeling then, and still to this day, is if people just knew who we were, our lives could be so much easier. And so it very much felt like an intervention, a cultural intervention, of creating awareness, which we need so badly in this country. And I think what evolved as I grew in my thinking and through my journey, what really evolved was this understanding that actually our challenges weren't isolated from other challenges that people throughout this country and around our world feel constantly, and that helping people to see their biases, but more than that, it's almost like helping people to realize how perhaps unconsciously, usually unconsciously, I think, their behaviors are affecting other people in negative ways. I think that really came to be what something that I felt really passionate about, and so that's part of what I wanted to do. And then the last piece that really came together for me was this experience of Sikh philosophy that I found, both for myself and other people I knew, to be such a powerful insight into how you live into life's challenges. And it's, for a long time, I thought it was just like, these are just ideas for people who come from Punjab, like my family. And I started to realize that actually these ideas had a lot to offer our world today, including questions like, how do you love your neighbor? Or how do you love people who hate you and who don't see your humanity, but you want to see theirs? I mean, those were things that I really struggled with, especially growing up in this country, and found answers to through Sikh philosophy. And I think it was 2016, to answer your question about why now, 2016 is when I started writing in earnest, and that's when Trump was elected. I was teaching Islamic studies in Texas at the time, which was really challenging and also really rewarding. But I started to see how much people around me were struggling in finding the humanity in people even in people in their own families, people they really cared about, and really feeling like they couldn't have relationships with them. And that's when I started to understand that this could be a book that, and these ideas could be a balm for some of the challenges people are facing.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, I think maybe it's worth a moment's pause on a Sikh man growing up in Texas, teaching Muslim studies in Texas, and just the dynamic, like what you're, I know that you had death threats before you even came into that job, right? Like, but what that, like the holding of those identities and the sort of care of a community that is not your community, but in many ways, you know, in the popular imagination, you get confused all the time, right? Like it's this kind of, it's this wild world we're living in, and to do that through in Texas is just really profound for me. I wonder if we could go in a little bit into some of the Sikh philosophy, because it was really fascinating to dig in. And one of the things that I wanted to start with was that the daily practice and just the concept of practice as opposed to simply kind of belief that emerges. And when I was reading your book, one of the things that struck me were words like sacrifice. You say sacrifice a lot, putting others first, discipline, decentering the self, service of others. And you have this like this wild story that where your parents made you return all of your birthday gifts except for two. You had to not return them, I'm sorry, but you had to give them, you had to move them, give them to others, right? And so there's this sense of putting others first. So I was thinking about that in a Christian context, that can get kind of dicey, because what we tend to do with practices is to make them into qualities for individuals, right? And it can, I think that when it becomes a kind of static quality of an individual, in a Christian context, it can often be toxic. And I think about the effects of purity culture, racialized ideas of who's most righteous, you know, like sort of the legacy of Puritanism and how that's played out, even like, you know, the way in which homophobia is like a denial of self in some ways. Like there's a lot of things you could do with, and people have done to people in the name of sort of self-sacrifice, right? But it struck me that in the Sikh context, it's offering something completely different. And I wonder if you could dig into that a little bit, how you see those differences.
Yeah. Oh man, I don't even know where to begin. That's such a great question. Maybe the place to begin is what you surfaced at the beginning of the conversation, Sharon, just to sort of continue with that. And that is, this question is an opportunity to explore a bias that many of us have, especially in the Western context, and that is religion and religious living is a function of belief. When we talk about what religions are about, typically, we ask, what do they believe? Even when we think about synonyms we have for religion, it's faith. And this is a particularly Protestant echoing of what does it look like to be religious? If you think about Martin Luther and what he was protesting, you know, what he's ultimately saying is what is primary is the belief. What is it that you have faith in? And I would say that to some degree, this is true in many traditions, and to some degree, it's a misnomer for us to assume, as we often do, that belief comes above all else in this way for other traditions. And it's something that I've been exploring myself. So what we learn in graduate school about religious traditions as we're going down this path of belief versus practice is that there are essentially two models. There's orthodoxy, which is about traditional ways of thinking, dogma, but there's also orthopraxy, which is a term we don't typically talk about because it's not so Protestant, but traditions like Islam or Hinduism will typically have a primary emphasis on what you do, not what you believe. And to some degree, this also might sound familiar, right? We know that, and we hear this: faith without works is dead. And so I don't think these ideas are at tension with one another. I'm just trying to share what can often be an assumption that, or an unconscious bias that we have about the relationship between the two. In the Sikh tradition, the two go hand in hand. And the idea is it matters just as much what you do as it does how you do it or why you do it. And the motivation is key. There is no ends justify the means. There is no skipping steps in terms of here's who I want to become, and so I'm going to take a shortcut. We believe very much that you develop the virtues that you practice every day, and that's how your values become your qualities, how that becomes ingrained in your character, and that's who you become, who you aspire to be. So that is very much the way that I read my tradition. The one other thing I want to say here is I just keep thinking about Brad's reflection at the opening, and it brought to mind a line from our scripture that in relation to my grandmother I've been thinking about quite a bit. It's Kabira marta marta jagmua mar bhi na jane koi aisi marni jo mare bahur na marna hoy. It's a poet named Kabir, and he says the whole world is dying. Everyone's always dying, but no one really knows how to die. And then he says, whoever dies, let them die in such a way that they never die again. And the language is so sharp because it's constantly repeating this word about death. Marna, marta, marni, mua. I mean, it's really heavy on death, but I think what he's really saying here is no one knows how to truly live, right? He says no one knows how to truly die, but then he says, let them die in such a way they never die again. And I think what he's trying to tell us is, let's live in such a way that we are constantly feeling lively. And I think that to me is part of what orthopraxy is about, that the emphasis on practice is helping you to maintain a discipline and living in such a way that you're conscious about the life that you have. And if part of your practice is gratitude, then you're feeling grateful all the time. If part of your practice is service, then you're finding this connection with people around you. And so that to me has been a really powerful insight, just what I've been thinking about recently, and very much sparked by your grandmother's video, Brad, about purpose. Like what are we trying to do here? And let's live in a way where we're constantly keeping that in our hearts.
There's also this piece around our own happiness, right? You talk a lot in there about our own happiness, and the ways in which we can get to that. And it's through these practices that it's not like I was thinking about, where does the self fit in different traditions, right? And that there's the sort of literally self-emptying that you speak of in the ways of serving others, of always making sure you're giving first, of wanting to make sure that that you're not getting in the way of the service that you're providing. But it's not done in the sense, it seems to me, from tell me if I've got this wrong, but it's not like we're not part of that, so that when you're in the service, it's actually serving you as well, because we're all part of this radical connectedness. And so I'm just, so I'm wondering about that sense of that the self is not static, but it's in relationship, right? And we're always in this relationship.
Yeah. So first of all, this is just showing me that you actually read the book.
I did.
Which I think is what you're really trying to do, is prove to the professor that you did the homework.
There you go. I want my A.
Yeah. I'll say that what you just described is actually, to me, my favorite part of the book. It's the last section. It's the shortest section, and it's the part of the book where I felt like I was actually sharing the promise of this way of thinking. And I think part of what feels promising is it's almost like the ideas of connectedness and love build up to service. And I think in the US, our understanding of service or even activism is so limited. It's so limited. I mean, we can't imagine beyond what it is that we do, like what do we accomplish? And the way we measure that constantly is by asking the question of like, what can you show me that you've done? And I think we really miss the point of what service is actually all about, because on the one hand, it's not about, you know, what have you accomplished? It's about what have you done to reduce the suffering of others? What have you done to bring more joy into this world? And ultimately, those are not empirical in the way that we want them to be. And what you were just sharing, Sharon, and this is the part that I really love, is we completely miss the point that actually, as we're looking to transform society, we can also be transforming ourselves. And that if we set ourselves up in the right way, in the right process, and with the intentions grounded of what we're trying to do, then actually serving others is also serving ourselves, but not in the way that makes our egos greater and our suffering more, but the opposite. It makes our egos less and our suffering less. And it's in some ways such a it's like a koan, a Zen koan. It's counterintuitive, it's paradoxical, it's hard to wrap our heads around, but I'll also say it's something that we all know in our daily experiences. And I share some stories in the book where, you know, I felt really stuck, including during the pandemic with COVID, where we live in New York City. We had young kids. My wife she's a doctor. She's serving patients. I had no idea what to do. And I just felt my world shrinking. Like I couldn't get over my anxiety because we were just stuck in our four walls and didn't know what to do and didn't know how to get out of it. And I couldn't break that cycle. And the solution was not what I believed or how I thought. It was actually getting out into the world and serving people. And I started to realize, in retrospect, of course, because it's hard to see these things when you're living through them, but I started to see in retrospect that, you know, service was actually my liberation from this cycle that I couldn't break out of. And it helps to reduce my self-centeredness at a time when I couldn't look beyond myself and my family. And yeah, it was a real savior for me.
Mm. So there are two moments I thought in the book where you really do this gorgeous work of describing a journey, and the COVID was one of those. So I'd love to go into that. And I know I'm going to butcher the language, so I'm going to ask you to read it again. But there was this line that I don't think it came out in the COVID section, but I was like, oh wow, it just it jumped off the page. So I'm going to try. Aka Jiva Visre Mar Jao. How'd I do?
Beautiful. That's perfect Punjabi. Yeah, nice.
Really? Okay. And so I remembering I live, in forgetting I die. And I was thinking about Brad's grandmother's, thinking about that, and even Brad's grandmother, the video of Brad's grandmother, in the sense of remembering. And I think I'm wondering if there's this genre of books right now that are coming out that people wrote during COVID. So you started in 2016, but in the center of it are a number of chapters around COVID itself. So clearly we're writing it during that period, and that was forming part of the journey story you were telling in the book. And I'm just wondering about, and it seems particularly appropriate for Reimagine and for this space, I'm just so worried about us forgetting, and in this notion of, in forgetting I die, in remembering I live. And I wonder if you could just say you had an aha moment, because that's your evening prayer, or your nighttime prayer, right? And then it shifted for you. And can you describe that?
Yeah, I mean, it was one of these things where, I'd said the prayer every single day, every evening. It's our evening prayer. We say it every evening. And it's not that I just said the words and didn't know the meaning. I had learned the meaning and understood what it meant. But I don't think I ever, when you understand something intellectually versus you get it, like you know viscerally, personally, like how this applies to life. And I had this moment where I was like, oh my God, like this is talking about a relationship. And this is what life's about. Like when you're in a relationship, you feel connected to someone. And when you are connected with them, you feel alive. And when you're disconnected with them, you feel dead. Like life sucks. Like you don't want anything to do with it, right? And it's such a the idea of remembrance is such a central concept in our tradition. My name actually means remembrance.
Oh, that's it.
Yeah. And the idea is essentially like when you are in remembrance, you are connected, and when you're connected, then you're joyful, right? Like that's what love is. And to me, I understood intellectually that that's what this line meant, but it never really clicked until this moment where I started to say, okay, what we're talking about here is relationship. And that's where love started to make sense to me as a spiritual concept, that connection, that remembrance is not, some isolated sitting in a corner and meditating, at least not in our tradition. It is just this inner constant remembrance, no matter what you're doing, however you're living in the world. But this feeling of love, this feeling of connectedness with the world around us. And so it's simple in some ways. I realize as I'm describing it, it's like, how did you not make this connection before? But for me, it just hadn't occurred to me. Nobody talked to me about it in this way. And when I came to understand it, that particular line, really, I mean, even now is one that really grounds me.
Well, and I think about, in that, and it connects, I think, to the other struggle I really what I want us to talk about, but that there's something in the remembering and the capacity to forgive, right? And so the other struggle that was so profound was the year-long work that you did to eradicate hate in your own spirit for Wade Michael Page, who was the killer who killed all those people in Oak Creek.
Mm-hmm.
And it took a long time for you to get there. And it was Sikh wisdom, sort of spoken to you by a child that you were teaching first, that kind of got you moving. But and then you moved to a different place around that. And there was these lines that really stuck out to me. And to me, it's connected inside. I don't know if the connection is clear, but it's connected in that prayer. But I finally felt fully liberated from my pain and anger. The answer did not come from a false sense of forgiveness, nor did it come from giving into hate. The answer came from finding oneness through our differences. And what struck me, and again, it's connected to this forgetting we die and remembering we live, but that there's this, when a hate crime happens, often we have two responses, which are really, I think, kind of the flip side of the coin. And one is to ask for kind of easy, fast forgiveness from people, from the victims of a crime, right? And so that we can mitigate and not have to deal with the collective trauma of that work, right? And then the other is to repudiate and to punish. And so wanting to individualize who did this thing and to punish them as much as we can, right? And so that's our goal often. And it struck me that you're asked that Sikh wisdom is offering something else. And it's not about a kind of easy forgiveness, but it's also like really working with the eradicating of hate for you. And then it comes back to that. It's not just like so that you can like wear a halo and be a good person, but it's like your capacity to be a full human and to like be fully in the world and to have joy and happiness is contingent on eradicating that hate. And so you have to do that work. So I wondered, that was just really powerful. And it's like, when I think it's really hard, and I think it should be hard for any conversation that is about forgiving, seeing the light, whatever language we want to use, about those that persecute us and who do and are responsible for horrific crimes. But I think like there's something in the Sikh philosophy that I had like, oh, this is a different way than the way that we usually do this work.
Yeah. It's interesting because in some ways the concept of forgiveness it feels really foreign to me. It's not a concept it's not so central in the way that it is in Christianity. Maybe that's a good way to put it, but like maybe that's why it feels foreign, because it's not my register, it's not my way of thinking, it's not our framework. And in this moment when I was, incredibly angry with this person, and people, my friends who I talked to about my anger, and they were like, "You just got to forgive him. You just got to forgive him." And I tried as a way to deal with my own anger, and I sincerely tried, and the reality is, it didn't feel genuine. Even when I said I forgave him, I could say to a degree, but like he never apologized. He wasn't remorseful. He was so angry that he killed these innocent people, and then he was so cowardly that he took his own life before he could be held accountable. Like, how could I forgive someone that's not apologetic about what they've done? And so it didn't seem like the right way to me. But I'll say that your observation spot on, Sharon, that to me it feels like so often, not just in our society, but the human instinct is fight or flight, right? We know that. And forgiveness to me in some ways feels like flight, right? Like, I don't want to deal with this. I'm gonna let it go. Or even when we find it to be courageous, right? We will lean towards love as almost this like letting go approach, and then the other side of the coin is the punitive one, which we know and doesn't feel good either. And I think maybe one way to describe how I've come to understand this now as a parent, I have 2 young girls, and they're awesome, and also they get in trouble sometimes, and here's why I'm bringing this up, because I've learned through parenting that holding someone accountable for their actions does not mean that you have to hate them. It does not mean you have to be angry or vengeful or even punitive. You can do it out of love. And that's what I do with my kids, right? Like, they do something messed up, I'm not just going to forgive them straight up. But I'm also not just going to punish them. Like, I want them to grow and learn because I care about them. And finding this middle path is so much harder. For a moment, I'm talking about parenting. It's so hard because it takes energy, and you have to really be committed, and there's opportunity cost, right? Like, if I want to go through this with them, it takes time. But because it's coming out of love, like, that's how I want. It almost doesn't feel like a choice, right? This is the way that I am with them. And I know a lot of us are this way with our kids or family members. And so we know this through our experience, that this is what a loving response looks like when someone has crossed a line or made a mistake or needs coaching. And so why wouldn't we take that model and apply it to people that we don't know? Again, I think the answer is because it's hard. It's hard to work with people who, in this case, hate you, right? Literally hate you and want you dead. But I don't know another way where we can actually, again, getting back to this point of like serving the people around us out of love, even if they hate us, and also through that process, like transforming ourselves. Like in the example you gave, like really I was trying to eradicate the hate from my heart as well, because I didn't want to walk around living angry anymore.
Mm,
It was really important for me to resolve that.
mm. I still want to just jump right into the parenting, but I think that should maybe be our last question, because I have a burning, I hope we can you stay on just for a few more minutes?
Sure,
Because I
sure.
have a burning question that I really need to ask, and then I want to get to that. And that is, and you've been bringing this up in a lot of different spaces for a while. So I want us to be able to have a little time to talk about it. But it seems like to me, and I'm curious what your thinking is right now, that we need a better way to talk about experiences of religious minorities who are targeted for both their faith and their race. And it strikes me so much that there is this like very conscious decision to be in public as a Sikh man that is all about being a person that exudes love and is trying to live righteously in the world. You know, how like, and to do that, and that the turban, all of it is a way to tell people, look, I am on this religious path. I am on this path of love.
Mm-hmm.
And that the read is often the exact opposite. And it's not just, you know, nasty, mean people on the street. It's actually, you know, you have lots of passages where you talk about what happens in airports, where service people like ask you to take your turban off, even though it's against the law, and you have to go into a bathroom to do it, which is the compromise. They want to do it all in public. And there's a sense of always that you're being seen as the perpetrator and a potential terrorist and all of that. And it's the opposite of the of the why of how you're holding yourself in faith. And I just wonder, like, I'm not sure that we figured it out. I wanted your thoughts about like the sort of like where that dovetailing happens between racialized discrimination and religious discrimination. And I wonder where your thoughts are about where we can go around that.
Yeah, it's
which could be another lecture, right?
it could be another. I mean, I was going to do the standard professor thing, which is it's really complicated, and let me give you 5 examples. So let me very briefly tell you that it's complicated and give you a few examples. And one of them is, what do you do with someone like me? If you're asking the question of, well, is the discrimination I'm facing based on religion or race? I mean, I think the reality is, it's based on my religious identity, like the markers that I wear and keep, for the most part, are religious, right? Not my brown skin, but my beard and my turban. But for the people who are coming after me, it's because it's racialized, because they have a certain racialized understanding of who their enemy is, and I fit that profile. So that's one example. That's really complicated, right? Like, how are you going to discern what's in someone's heart for why they're attacking me, and can they even articulate clearly what it is that they see about me, and whether it's religious or racial? Like, it's probably, I mean, I haven't seen it play out that way. What do you do with the community, like the Jewish community, where anti-Semitic attacks are exponentially rising? I mean, it is one of the worst forms of hate we're seeing in our country right now. But this is a community that sees itself as an ethnic community and a religion, and it doesn't really dissociate one from the other. And you also have Jews of color who are different races and ethnic backgrounds. And so that complicates the issue too. What do you do about a group like Muslims, which is, on the one hand, racialized based on the same stereotypes that I was referring to earlier that I face, and is actually one of the most diverse religious traditions in the world. And you can't really put a pin or put a, you can't even say that there is one ethnic group or one racial group that Muslims constitute. I mean, it's so incredibly diverse. And so, just to your question, I think culturally we have a lot more work to do to understand not just why these things happen, but also how. And I think the reality is, for each community, it plays out in different ways, in different geographical contexts, it plays out in different ways. And until we start putting time and attention towards understanding the why and the how, it's going to be really difficult to start curbing some of the uglier forms of discrimination that we're facing today.
Yeah. Oh, I so want to just go deep, deep, deep on that. But we are nearing the end of our time, and the good folks at Reimagine have asked me to move it on to our last question. So I'm going to ask, I wanted to just have a multi-generational moment around and move in that direction for a moment. I have to tell you, Simran, I fell in love with your mom in this whole, in your narrative, and there's lots that were just amazing about her. But I wondered if you could share a passage that came after you and your brothers were told to leave a skating rink in Texas because you were wearing turbans, right? And I think do you have that passage ready, or you need me to find it for you?
Okay. I do, yeah. Thanks for sending this over. And for context, I was in fourth grade at the time, and my mother essentially rallied the parents and teachers and students, my classmates, to walk out together in protest. And so this is the passage that Sharon asked me to read. My mother's decision to lead and mobilize our community provides a powerful insight into how much stronger we are in solidarity. If my mother had walked out with just the four of us in tow, my brothers and I likely would have internalized the feeling that we didn't belong. What's more, no one else would have gained anything from the incident. By sharing the situation with our teachers and classmates, she gave them the chance to care and stand up. By bringing everyone together for a collective action, she showed her own kids that their friends cared for them. Whether or not this had any effect on the roller skating rink or its manager isn't the point. What's most important is that my mother, in this moment, showed all of us, parents and teachers and students alike, how one fights for justice with grace and love.
I love that, because I think we get so few models of how to be community together when something traumatic happens. And that just modeled it for me. And it was really powerful. And so I guess my final question is, well, let me just say, I see you, Simran. I see your mother in you. I see the way in which I think that you are teaching us, and it's really step by step. It's very practice oriented around how we all show up in solidarity for each other. I think that's one of your beautiful gifts to the universe, and I have been on the receiving end of it, and I'm so grateful. And so my final question is really, like, what kind of world do you hope for your two daughters and their teachers and their friends parents? And how does Sikh wisdom help us get there?
Yeah, I mean, without being overly idealistic, which I could easily be, I've been thinking a lot about fear recently, fear and confidence. And two young girls, elementary school, are going to grow up in a world where they feel insecure, where they feel like they have to fit in, where they feel like they don't belong. And I'm not just talking about religious difference. I mean, it's also gender. It's also sexual orientation. I mean, all the way that our lives show up in this world. I mean, I just see the mental health crisis and the isolation that so many people are feeling. And I want to create a world for them and for everyone in which fear is no longer something that's at the core of our daily suffering. Feel that we really are connected, and then that we really do have loving relationships, and people care about us and we care about them. And so that's what I wish for them, and that's what I wish for all of us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both so much. Honestly, that was such an exquisite conversation, Sharon and Simran, and yeah, just drove home so much. I wanna to say bye to Simran. want to just share briefly a poem with you that was kind of a thank you poem to the two of you about what you show us. These are five lines, 3 words per line, but I feel like this captures part of what you talked about. You show us service can liberate us from us. To be us, love is us. So just wanted to say this message around service and at Reimagine we talk a lot about how to heal ourselves and heal the world simultaneously, and that idea that acts of creativity, acts of service, and we say the same thing, that our definition of service in this country is so narrow and needs to be expanded. And we're actually working to build a platform that I'm really excited to honestly share with both of you. That we're trying to take these ideas and inspire people to do that simultaneous work. And yeah, it just feels like we're just the alignment around what you said and what our North Star is as an organization, all the people on this call. I think it's just a beautiful vision for how the world can be. And I think, there's so much untapped potential to model for one another what that can look like. And so to have models like both of yourselves leading this conversation with us is really, really powerful. I also just want to acknowledge, before Simran's going to take off and we're into the honor ceremony, but my father, Jim, just saw my dad join, and we were talking about intergenerational conversation. And I just want to say hi, Dad, to you. Who he's obviously mourning as well. It was his mother who passed away. So just really appreciate, Dad, you being here, and just to say that I honored Grandma with the video at the beginning. And I just wonder if you, just for 30 seconds, want to hop off mute and just respond if there's anything you want to share to Simran about just this lesson of what he's talking about in terms of intergenerational wisdom and the modeling that he had from his own mother. I feel very grateful to have had you and Grandma kind of model what justice and can look like. And if there's just anything you want to say in response to Simran before we move into the honor ceremony, because it's so nice to see you here, dude. I'm trying to unmute you. There you are.
Thanks, Brad. I was seeing patients, so I just caught about the last half. And what I got out of part of especially the end of the interview, was the importance of what others give us, beginning with our family. And many of us are fortunate to have relatives, parents, in my case, my mother and father. And the focus more recently has been on our mother because of what's transpired. And I saw that in your guest today, the impact of his mother. And the wisdom she had when here he is, a little boy, teaching him early on a concept that is so strong, and that experience in class and the walking out. And so I think we're all looking for those who can impart in us wisdom. And I just, to finish up, I just felt blessed, as does Brad, that we had in our lives an individual, a grandmother who insinuated into us concepts that you would think would be otherwise, given what she had gone through. And there was never bitterness. There was always kindness, and my mother and father always giving, always thinking about what can I do, what can we do for others. And there's a real beauty in that. And but thanks, Brad. I don't want to take up.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for sharing. And just wanted you to meet Simran and Sharon and just thanks for being here. So Simran, thank you so much for this beautiful conversation, and look forward for everyone to follow your work and get your book, and to learn more about your journey and be shaped by all the incredible Sikh wisdom, but the wisdom that you have from your own lived experience and your own intergenerational transmuted experiences from everything that's come before, so we can, grow and heal. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. Take care.
And with that, so grateful to turn to Ashley Plotnick. Ashley is going to lead us in the honor ceremony. She has volunteered with the COVID Grief Network and has served as a facilitator for Reimagine's new monthly gathering, Room for Grief, which anyone here can join. And Andy will tell you a little bit more about in a few minutes. But her work has been informed by her degrees in social work, spiritual direction, and grief counseling, as well as the heartbreaking experience of losing her grandmother. So we honor your grandmother here. Ashley lost her grandmother to COVID in early 2021. Professionally, Ashley works in Chicago as a therapist for Wellington Counseling Group, as well as the director of congregational learning at, I'm not sure if I butcher this, and you can correct me.
It's Macomb Solar Lakeside. It's a synagogue in the suburbs of Chicago.
Yeah, it's so good. And so thank you so much for all your incredible work, and looking forward to you sharing with us and kind of guiding us into this ceremony that we're about to do together.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Brad. Thank you, Andy, for the invitation. I know in particular you were intentional about wanting to create an interfaith space this evening, and so I'm really grateful for that experience and to have learned with and from Simran and Sharon. So thank you. So I prepared a little writing, and then I've adapted it when I was taking a whole bunch of notes as Simran was speaking, and I was so inspired by what he shared and by Sharon's questions. So in the Jewish calendar, we're in the midst of the month of Av, which is the name of a Hebrew month, having just mourned the destruction of the temple in history. In 2 weeks, we'll enter the month of Elul, which is in the Jewish calendar, the month in which we begin to make preparations, spiritual, emotional, and for those of us who work for synagogues, logistical preparations for the high holy days. Even the Jewish calendar knows we must make space for brokenness, for grief, and for longing for that which once was before we can enter a new year. Also noteworthy is that today in the Hebrew calendar is Tu B'Av, which is the day for love. And so I believe that between grief and new beginnings, we have to always make space for love. So the prayer that has always spoken to me most is the one that we traditionally recite in the month of Elul, which is coming up. It's found in Psalm 27. The first couple of lines in Hebrew say, Achat sha'alti me'et Adonai ota avakesh, shivti beveit Adonai kol yamei chayai. One thing I ask of God, only this do I seek, that I might dwell in the house of Adonai, which is a name for God, all the days of my life. So I've learned in my lifetime and most intensely these past few years that this is truly what I seek, to live in the house of Adonai, which is also the unpronounceable name in Judaism, the unknowable name, sometimes the sound of our own breath. And to me, it is to live in each moment, to breathe in each moment, and to really know that each moment is enough. The theologian Abraham Joshua Heschel writes, just to live is a blessing, just to be is holy. If nothing else, grief forces us to slow down, and in moments of doubting, to remember that in the being we are enough. My story is long and winding, as is anyone's whose work focuses on God, sex, and death. I also work as a sex therapist, but I'm so grateful for all of the varied pieces that brought me back to psychotherapy, to grief counseling, to the COVID Grief Network, to Reimagine, and finally to this moment with all of you. When the pandemic struck, I longed for a way to give back in whatever small way I could. I was so grateful to see a post on social media about the newly formed COVID Grief Network, which reminds me of the quote we just learned, that service was my liberation. And so truly, finding that piece of giving back by volunteering was a piece of my own liberation through surviving the pandemic. As soon as I attended the initial volunteer training, I knew I had touched something remarkably sacred. That evening with the founders of the organization, who were all so young and so just dedicated, gave me so much hope for the future of our world. If we could only embody their sense of compassion, justice, patience, responsibility, and true loving kindness, how much holier could our world be? I began volunteering for CGN, which now is as part of Reimagine. And at the time, I enrolled in a grief counseling certificate program to be sure I had some idea of what I was doing in this new realm of intense mourning. While the course was helpful, I learned the most from the people who I've been privileged to sit with in their brokenness and in their most vulnerable, real, beautiful ways. I'm particularly grateful to my grief group, a group which was scheduled to meet for 8 sessions, but has continued well beyond 2 years, and we keep in touch to this day. While most of us have never met in person, we know each other's souls. In the midst of my volunteer work, I sometimes wondered if I fully understood the COVID grief experience, as nobody in my inner circle had succumbed to the disease. As Brad mentioned, that changed in February 21 when my beloved grandma was diagnosed and died a short time later alone and really what felt like so far away. She was in Baltimore, we were in Chicago. My last moment with her was reciting the prayers for death over FaceTime while a nurse held the phone. Her funeral was only for immediate family, and my 40th birthday occurred during her Shiva over Zoom. We're so incredibly grateful that she lived a long and beautiful life, and yet nobody should die alone in a hospital the way that she did. I hope and pray that by continuing to hold space for the grief held within each one of us, sharing the stories of our broken hearts, stepping closer into healing through connection, we can honor the legacies left by our loved ones, for their memories are indeed a blessing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you for that beautiful blessing. And with that in mind, now is the opportunity, or in 1 second anyway, to begin pasting, unless you already have them ready to go, to typing the names of anyone you would like to honor into the chat this evening. It doesn't have to be a human. It can be anything you'd like to either honor or let go. But this is the space, and also maybe the reason or any note you'd like to share to us or to them at this moment. We'll do that for a couple minutes while some music plays in the background. right, thank you so much, everyone. Feel free to keep adding any names, but it's such an honor to be in all of our presences with these names and these messages. Maybe Ashley, would you care to lead us in just like 2 or 3 deep breaths together?
Sure. So the way I like to lead deep breaths is just to get grounded wherever you're sitting, kind of focus on if your feet are on the floor, just feeling your body on the chair, the couch, the bed, wherever you find yourself. And I like to just take a breath in, and then on the out breath, if you're comfortable, just sigh and imagine the breath going down, flowing through your body and out into the earth. So we can do that 3 times. So we'll take a breath in. Do it again. 1 more breath in. And 1 final time, we'll breathe in. We'll let go of that which no longer serves us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And with that, I think it's time to pull back up a prayer for all of us. Oh, it was so funny. My candle just did it on its own accord. That was pretty neat. My candle just did its own extinguishing. But we're gonna read 3 times the candle extinguishing prayer, and anyone's welcome to read along with us. At the end of this, I'll invite all of us to then, if you so choose, to take a deep breath on the count of 3, and we can extinguish our candles as a community and let the light out into the world. But if you choose to keep the candle burning until it naturally does its thing, that's also okay. There's no pressure. And if you don't have a candle and you'd like to join us in the extinguishing, you can use your breath, as Ashley just so beautifully shared with us, and you can exhale with us and let that be your message of light for all of us. So with that in mind, feel free to join me, anyone, verbally, wherever you are. By extinguishing our candles, we release light into our world to keep alive the memories of those we honor today and tomorrow and for the rest of our lives.
By extinguishing our candles, we release light into our world to keep alive the memories of those we honor today and tomorrow and for the rest of our lives.
Sharon, would you care to lead us home?
By extinguishing our candles, we release light into our world to keep alive the memories of those we honor today and tomorrow and for the rest of our lives.
And now on the count of 3, 3, 2, 1. All right, thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. I want to close out with just a couple more things, but it's just been such an exquisite conversation, as I mentioned. I want to bring my colleague Andy Engel forward. Andy, thank you so much. Andy was responsible for booking, I don't know if booking is even the right word, inviting, swindling, lovingly opening the door to bring Ashley, Sharon, and Simran into our midst. So Andy, thank you so much for everything you did to make this event so special this evening.
It's my pleasure. Sharon, thank you so much for that beautiful interview with Simran. You really did your homework. And Ashley, thank you for that beautiful intention. Zichrono livracha, may your grandmother's memory be a blessing. So in terms of other events coming up for Reimagine, we have our monthly COVID grief gathering. It's on August 8th. And this is a drop-in space for all those experiencing specific losses as a result of the pandemic. Our guest facilitator is Michael Shannon. The COVID grief gathering takes place every second Tuesday of the month. And you can register for that with the link. Another gathering that we have is Room for Grief. On August 17th, longtime Reimagine collaborator Christabeth Atwood will facilitate Room for Grief, and this takes place every third Thursday of the month. And the intention for this gathering is to hold space for those mourning all kinds of losses using art, creativity, and prompts. And in light of all we talked about in terms of service, or in the Sikh tradition, seva, we hope you can join us for a 3-part series that we're kicking off next Wednesday. We'll be delving into how acts of service impact our personal growth and the communities around us. We'll be exploring how helping neighbors will produce ripples of healing, connection, and empowerment, and foster a sense of belonging and purpose, especially when we are experiencing loss. And I want to give a shout out to my colleague, Misha Jain, who was one of the organizers of this series. We'll be having some really great guests. Just a few words about them. Becca Bernstein, who's head of Option B. Marisa Renee Lee, who's a former staff member in the Obama administration and author of Grief is Love. We'll have Julian Pistone, who's the co-founder of Courage, and Shakina Eliason, who's the CEO of George Mark Children's House, and a whole range of other guests. So I hope you can join us. And finally, on September 6th, I hope you'll join us for the next monthly vigil. It will feature a conversation between author and artist Wendy McNaughton and Lady Bird Morgan, who's the founder of the Humane Prison Hospice Project. So please join us for that.
Thanks, Andy. And I did want to just share to Ashley and to then the staff and to all of you who showed up today, just this poem on the right, our little thank you poem. Thank you. Every month, we're sad but glad to mourn, grieve, grow, and love together. So thank you for being here. I do want to stop sharing for a sec. You know, it's 6:26. We end in 4 minutes. I was thinking Misha, who joined the call, my colleague Misha, could maybe post a link for all of you in the chat. This link is to a little survey. If anyone's interested in filling out not just a survey about how the event went, but ways you can also potentially get more involved in Reimagine. And there's little things you can select. So if you want to spend a couple minutes with us while, thank you, Misha, for dropping that link in, by the way. If anyone wants to click that open now, it would be amazing. If you want to fill that out and just see how we can collaborate more with you and how we can involve you in more ways in this work that we're doing, would be fantastic. And meanwhile, that gives us a chance to hear from, you know, one or two, maybe one comment, but that doesn't mean there's any more pressure on whoever that one is and wants to share something. It's just anyone who feels like they want to stand forward and share whatever's coming up would be wonderful. It's always meant to be, whatever happens. So does anyone have any reflection on the conversation between Sharon and Simran, or anything that Ashley shared, or just the overall experience that came up for you this evening that you'd like to grace us with in this last couple minutes? And feel free just to get off mute or raise your hand or anything like that. It was almost like a test. It was almost a test of wills, and your wills are stronger than my will. It's like sometimes you just hold space long enough, but sometimes it's not always meant to be. Yeah, it just reminds me. I've hosted in my life only through this role at Reimagine. I have hosted or officiated weddings before, and I was in which is something I'm feeling more adequate at. But then I was invited to lead a funeral at some point in the past for someone I didn't know very well. Someone actually it was a friend's ex partner she had committed suicide, and they needed somebody. And I'm not an expert in this, but it was a last minute situation, so I hopped in to try to hold space, and I didn't know the best way to do it. So I ended up at some point just vacating the mic and letting anyone who wanted to share come forth. And there was a long period of silence, almost like this, but longer. And then people started coming forward, and then it opened up a really powerful dialogue between people, and there was a lot of pain involved in this experience, but it provided a sense of real comfort for a lot of people. More recently, after my grandma's funeral, the rabbi met with us in advance, and she said, she's like, the one thing you should never do at a funeral is just have an open mic. So I was like thinking to myself, well, I don't know. She probably knows a lot more than I do, and it was kind of one of one, and it ended up okay in my experience. But I had a little footnote to myself. Maybe that's not the best idea. Although sometimes whatever's meant to be is meant to be, and I think sometimes silence is also totally okay. And so I don't feel uncomfortable in the silence with you, and I'm just grateful to sit with you and be with you in this space that we're all creating together. And even silence is a very beautiful, powerful thing that growing up did make me uncomfortable, I would say, but as I've gotten older, I'm learning more and more, and it's to try to just be with silence in conversation or just in my own head. So sometimes it's grateful to have those moments. And with that in mind, maybe we will give the very last word therein to Sharon or Ashley. Just any, I feel okay calling on you to see if there's just any last reflection you want to share with this group before we take off.
Well, I'm happy to, unless there's something you want to share, Sharon. So I put my candle on a scratch paper that I had left over from a meeting I was in last week, and on it just says, listen. It has the word for love in Hebrew written on top, which is ahava, and it says, listen for love, listen for what's needed now. And so I thought that was an appropriate closing for this evening, and for the themes that I heard through the conversation and through the grief, and to continue, the legacy of love also, Brad, through your grandma, and through the many generations of survival that many of us have been born into.
I guess what's wild is that we're all just living forward people, the spirits of all these people in our lives that we're manifesting by being together. And that's kind of what we're co-creating right now, is all those people that came before us have a place with us in any space that we bring. And it's kind of an interesting idea just to think about all those people that that are here with us and that we're representing through our actions and through our words. Thank you. Yeah, and I'm feeling that more palpably now than I typically have access to. So that's really, really special. Thank you, Ashley. Sharon, last word from you.
Oh, I mean, just a huge gratitude for the community that you all are creating here, and the possibility of having these kinds of conversations which center grief, but also center the way in which we live our lives. And I don't know, it feels like a very, very profound space. And I'm honored to have been invited. Simran's one of my favorite people in the universe. So it was a treat to be able to interview him for that. And Brad, I just really moved to hear your story about your grandmother and to have your dad in the space. And one of my closest friends in the world, Louise Green, is on, who I had no idea was joining, and some others too that I'm close to. And so it just feels like family here.
It's all family here. That we're all family, and so that's the message. That's the perfect ending. Your family, Sharon and Ashley and Dad and Reimagine staff, Andy and Dara and Misha, but also Stephanie and Carolyn and Linda and uh, oh no, I started a bad thing because now I've got to this wonderful, exquisite name, Cetria. I hope that was correct, but your family too, and Megan and Kent and Kirsten and Louise and Tiffany and brother Jack and Brenda and Nan and Andrea and Karen. So love to you all. At the count of three, if you want to just say the word love together, we'll end that way. 3, 2, 1.
Love.
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 Bye, friends.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.